The morning of November 15th arrived in Manhattan like a painting, golden light pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Harrington Grand Hotel, casting long, elegant shadows across white marble floors that had been polished to a mirror shine. 240 guests sat in gilded chairs draped with ivory silk, holding their breath in the way that wedding guests always do in those final, trembling minutes before the bride appears. The fragrance of 10,000 white roses hung heavy in the air. A string quartet played something soft and aching near the altar. Everything was perfect. Everything was exactly as it should have been. Except it wasn't. Ethan Harrington, 33 years old, founder and CEO of Harrington Global Enterprises, a man whose name appeared on the Forbes list before he turned 30, whose face graced the cover of Fortune magazine twice in 1 year, whose empire stretched across real estate, technology, and renewable energy on 4 continents, stood at that altar in a charcoal Armani suit that had been custom-tailored in Milan, and he felt, for the very first time in his adult life, genuinely terrified. Not of marriage, not of commitment. He had wanted this. He had believed in this. He was terrified because somewhere deep inside his chest, beneath all the confidence and the carefully constructed walls and the polished public persona, a small, honest voice had been whispering to him for weeks. Something is wrong. You know something is wrong. He had silenced that voice with plans and logistics and the sheer momentum of a wedding that cost $4 million to organize. He had buried it under guest lists and catering menus and honeymoon itineraries for the Maldives. He had told himself the voice was just nerves, just the natural fear of a man who had always controlled everything suddenly stepping into something he couldn't fully control. But when Cassandra Whitmore walked down that aisle in her Vera Wang gown, with her platinum blonde hair swept up in an architectural arrangement of pearls and pins, and her blue eyes looking straight ahead with the carefully composed expression of a woman walking toward a business merger rather than a marriage, Ethan felt that voice rise up from a whisper to a shout. She stopped 6 feet from him. The music faltered and then died. 240 people inhaled simultaneously. Cassandra looked at him for a long, searching moment, and her composure cracked, not into tears, not into regret, but into something that looked almost like relief. "I can't do this, Ethan," she said, and her voice was remarkably steady for a woman standing at an altar in front of the entirety of New York's social elite. "I'm so sorry. I genuinely am. But I can't." And then she turned around and walked back down the aisle, her train whispering against the marble, and every single person in that ballroom watched her go with a stunned paralysis of witnesses to a car accident. Ethan stood at the altar alone. He didn't chase her. He didn't call her name. He didn't collapse or rage or make a scene. He simply stood there for a moment that felt eternal, with 240 pairs of eyes burning into his back, and he breathed, slowly, deliberately, the way he had trained himself to breathe through 1,000 high-stakes boardroom moments when everything was on the line. Then he nodded once, as though confirming something to himself, straightened a cuff link that didn't need straightening, and walked quietly off the altar toward the side exit. He moved through a service corridor that he had memorized days ago out of professional habit. Always know your exits. His father had told him when he was 12 years old, and he had never forgotten it. The corridor was plain and fluorescent lit and smelled of cleaning products and catering trays, an almost violent contrast to the opulence he had just left behind. His footsteps echoed against plain tile. Somewhere behind him, he could hear the low roar of 240 people beginning to process what they had just witnessed. He pushed through a heavy door and found himself in a quiet service area near the hotel's east wing, a wide, carpeted hallway lined with supply carts and mop buckets, the unglamorous infrastructure that kept places like the Harrington Grand functioning invisibly behind its beautiful facade. He leaned against the wall. He pressed the back of his head against cool plaster. He closed his eyes. And that was when he heard it. A small sound, so quiet it barely registered at first, a little hiccuping sob, the kind that comes after a longer cry has mostly finished. His eyes opened. He looked down the hallway. Sitting on the floor beside a large supply cart, half hidden behind a stack of folded linens, was a little girl. She was perhaps 3 years old, with dark curly hair that had been pulled into 2 lopsided pigtails, one of which had mostly escaped its elastic and was floating loose around her small face. She was wearing a tiny pale blue dress, clearly a uniform of some kind, the kind worn by the hotel's junior hospitality staff at events, and on her feet were white shoes with small buckles, one of which had come undone. She was clutching a battered stuffed rabbit to her chest with both arms, and she was crying with the quiet, exhausted determination of a child who had been crying for some time and had almost run out of energy for it. She hadn't seen him yet. Ethan Harrington, who had just been publicly humiliated in front of nearly everyone who mattered in his professional world, who had every reason to keep walking, who had 100 fires to put out and a PR team waiting for instructions, and a best man probably searching the entire hotel for him, stood completely still. Something about that small, solitary, genuinely heartbroken figure sitting on the floor with her lopsided pigtails and her worn-out rabbit cracked through every single one of his defenses in an instant. Not strategically, not consciously, just completely. He loosened his tie. He walked toward her. He folded himself down to the floor, $4 million suit against plain hotel carpet, and sat beside the supply cart, close enough that she could see him but not so close that he would startle her. She looked up. Her eyes were enormous, deep brown, still wet with tears, fringed with lashes that were clumped together from crying. She stared at him with the frank, unguarded assessment that only very small children are capable of, the kind of look that sees straight past every curated surface to whatever is actually there underneath. "You're sad," she said. Her voice was small and certain. Ethan blinked. Of everything he might have expected, fear, shyness, a fresh wave of crying, he had not expected to be immediately and accurately diagnosed by a 3-year-old. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I am a little sad." She considered this for a moment with great seriousness. Then she held out her rabbit, not to give it to him permanently, but in the instinctive, generous way that small children offer their most precious things to people they sense need comfort. "Benny helps," she said simply. Ethan looked at the offered rabbit. He looked at this small, tear-streaked, completely sincere child who had just lost her own battle with sadness and was already trying to help someone else win theirs. Something shifted in his chest, something enormous and long-locked and terribly important. He reached out gently and touched one worn velvet ear of the rabbit with one finger. "Thank you," he said, and he meant it more than he had meant almost anything in recent memory. Her name was Sophia Reyes, and she was 28 years old, and she had been running, not metaphorically but literally, at a full sprint down the service corridor in a pale blue housekeeping uniform with her dark hair escaping its braid, for about 45 seconds before she rounded the corner and saw her daughter sitting on the floor beside a supply cart talking to a man in an extraordinarily expensive suit. She stopped so fast she nearly slid on the polished tile. Her heart, which had been hammering with the specific terror of a mother who has briefly lost sight of her child in an unfamiliar building, performed a complex maneuver, relief and residual panic and sudden, acute embarrassment all colliding simultaneously. "Lily." The word came out breathless. "Oh, thank God, Lily." The little girl looked up with the placid expression of someone who had not remotely understood that she was lost.
"Mama.
This man is sad too." Sophia's eyes moved from her daughter to the man beside her, and the recognition hit her like cold water. She knew who he was. Of course she knew who he was. Everyone who worked at the Harrington Grand knew Ethan Harrington by sight, the owner's son, the man who had quietly taken over the entire hotel chain when his father retired 3 years ago, who had expanded it and redesigned it and kept every single one of its employees on payroll through 2 difficult years, a fact that the housekeeping staff discussed with genuine, protective loyalty in their break room. She had served at a dozen of his events. She had cleaned suites he had used, straightened chairs in meeting rooms where he had negotiated deals, polished elevator doors that his reflection had passed through. She had never spoken to him directly. And now he was sitting on the floor of a service corridor in what she was fairly certain was an Armani suit, having what appeared to be a genuine moment with her 3-year-old and a stuffed rabbit named Benny. Mr. Harrington. She crossed the remaining distance quickly, reaching down for Lily, who went to her arms with easy familiarity and immediately settled against her hip like she had been designed for exactly that position. "I am so sorry, sir." She wandered off during setup. "I only turned away for a moment. She knows she's not supposed to." "It's fine," he said. He was getting to his feet as she spoke, and there was something about the movement that caught her attention, a kind of careful deliberateness, like a man who was managing himself very precisely. She wasn't bothering anyone. "We were just talking." Sophia looked at him more carefully. She was good at reading people. You had to be in hospitality. You developed a kind of radar for the true emotional weather beneath social surfaces, and what she read in Ethan Harrington's face in that moment was something she recognized with the intimate accuracy of personal experience. It was the specific, carefully contained expression of someone who had just been broken open by something they hadn't fully processed yet and was holding themselves together through sheer force of will and practiced composure. She knew that expression. She had worn it herself 3 years ago, standing in a hospital parking lot with a newborn daughter and a phone call from her daughter's father informing her, with breathtaking casualness, that he wasn't coming. "Sir," she said, and her voice dropped slightly, losing the crisp professional register and becoming something quieter and more genuine. "Are you all right?" He looked at her for a moment, really looked at her. She felt, not with the automatic, unseeing glance that the powerful sometimes directed at service staff, but with actual attention. His eyes were hazel, she noticed. She hadn't known that from a distance. "I was just publicly left at the altar," he said, with a flatness that was somehow more devastating than drama would have been. "In front of most of the people I know professionally. So, no, I'm probably not entirely all right." The directness of it surprised her. She had expected deflection, the automatic "I'm fine" of powerful men who considered vulnerability a liability. Instead, he had just told her the plain truth, the way tired people sometimes do when they've run out of the energy required to perform okayness. "I heard," she admitted. She had. The news had traveled through the service corridors with the speed that dramatic events always did in hotels, whispered between catering staff, passed from the event coordinator to the housekeeping supervisor, delivered to Sophia via a wide-eyed colleague who had leaned into the linen supply room with the expression of someone bearing historic news. "I'm really sorry. I imagine that was very painful." "Mama," said Lily, from her perch on Sophia's hip, addressing Ethan with great seriousness. "She makes the best hot chocolate." Sophia felt heat rise to her face. "Lily." But something happened in Ethan Harrington's expression, something that had been held very tightly, very carefully, and it loosened just fractionally at the corners. Not quite a smile, but something in the neighborhood of one. "Does she?" he said. "She does," Lily confirmed, with the absolute authority of someone delivering a formally researched conclusion. "With the little marshmallows." "Lily's sweetheart, Mr. Harrington doesn't need to hear about." "Actually," he said quietly, and there was something in his voice that Sophia heard clearly, something that had nothing to do with hot chocolate and everything to do with a man standing alone in a service corridor after the worst hour of his professional and personal life. That sounds like exactly what I need to hear about right now. Sophia looked at him. He was still managing himself carefully. She could see it, the controlled breathing, the set of his jaw, the way he stood with a precision that was more effortful than natural. But his eyes, when they met hers, were completely unguarded. She shifted Lily on her hip. She made a decision that surprised even herself. "The staff kitchen is 2 corridors over," she said. "It's quiet. And I do have the little marshmallows." Lily beamed with the radiant satisfaction of someone whose diplomatic efforts have succeeded. And Ethan Harrington, who had just lost what he thought was the life he wanted, followed a hotel maid and her 3-year-old daughter down a service corridor toward a cup of hot chocolate, and felt, inexplicably, like something that had been very wrong for a very long time might, possibly, eventually become right. The staff kitchen was small and warm and smelled of coffee and dish soap and something faintly of the cinnamon rolls that the morning crew had left in a pan on the counter. It was a real room, not designed for anyone's impression of anything, just a practical, lived-in space with a worn linoleum floor and mismatched mugs and a corkboard near the refrigerator covered in shift schedules and birthday announcements and a child's crayon drawing of what appeared to be a purple dog. Ethan stood in the doorway for a moment, taking it in. He had owned this hotel for 3 years. He had redesigned its public spaces, upgraded its infrastructure, negotiated its supplier contracts. He had never been in this room. "You can sit down," Sophia said, already moving to the stove with the ease of someone completely at home in a space. "Unless you'd rather stand. Some people need to stand when they're processing things." He sat down. He took off his jacket, which he hadn't done in the ballroom, and folded it over the back of the chair, and he was somehow, immediately, slightly more human-looking without it. Lily had been placed on the counter beside the stove, a position she clearly considered a privilege, sitting with her small legs dangling and Benny the rabbit balanced on her knee, supervising the hot chocolate preparation with serious professional interest. "Marshmallows first or last?" Lily asked him. "Last," Ethan said. "Me too," she said, with deep approval. "Mama does them first. It's wrong." "Lily, it is not wrong," Sophia said, without turning from the stove, with the fond exasperation of someone revisiting a long-standing debate. "It's a different technique." "It's wrong," Lily said quietly but confidentially in Ethan's direction. He looked at this small, serious person making kitchen alliances with him 3 minutes after meeting him, and felt something unnot slightly in his chest. "What's her name?" he asked Sophia. "Lily. Lily Reyes." Sophia glanced over her shoulder. "And I'm Sophia. You probably should know the name of the person making your hot chocolate." "Sophia," he repeated. "I'm Ethan." "I know who you are, Mr. Harrington." "Ethan," he said. "Please." "The other thing requires the suit, and I think I'm retiring this suit for today." She looked at him again with that quality of attention he was beginning to recognize as characteristic, direct, genuinely perceptive, without either the deference that his position usually generated or the performative casualness that people sometimes adopted to prove they weren't impressed by his position. She was just looking at him, seeing him, deciding what she thought. "Ethan," she agreed, and turned back to the stove. The hot chocolate took 6 minutes. In those 6 minutes, Lily told him 3 important facts: that Benny the rabbit had been given to her by her grandmother in Guadalajara, that her favorite color was yellow but only specific yellows, not wrong yellows, and that she could count to 30, but sometimes she skipped 24 because it was suspicious. Ethan listened to all of this with complete, genuine attention, asking follow-up questions about the specific wrongness of certain yellows and the suspicious nature of 24, and something about the absurd, grounding normalcy of the conversation was more therapeutic than anything he might have found in that ballroom. Sophia set a mug in front of him. It was a large mug with a cartoon of a sleeping cat on it. It had marshmallows on top. She had given Lily hers first, marshmallows first, as Lily had predicted, and settled into the chair across from Ethan with her own mug held in both hands. "Tell me something," Ethan said, when the silence had settled into something comfortable rather than awkward. "And be honest, because I've had enough of people not being honest with me today. Do you think she was right to leave?" Sophia was quiet for a moment. Lily had climbed down from the counter with her cocoa and was now sitting on the floor, conducting some kind of private conversation with Benny. "I think," Sophia said carefully, "that it takes more courage to stop something wrong than to go through with it, because stopping is embarrassing." Whatever her reasons were, and I don't know them, she was brave enough to stop. That's worth something. He looked at her over his mug. "Most people would tell me I deserved better, that it was her loss." "Most people would tell you what you wanted to hear," Sophia said, without apology. "You asked me to be honest." "I did," he said. And then, quietly, "I think I knew too. I think I knew for months that it wasn't right. I just didn't want to lose the plan." "The plan," Sophia repeated. "The life I had arranged. 33, successful, partner, eventual family. Very organized. Very," he stopped, and something crossed his face that might have been self-recognition and wasn't entirely comfortable. "Very much like a business strategy, and not enough like an actual life." Sophia wrapped both hands around her mug. "I had a plan too," she said after a moment. "At 24. It included Lily's father. It was a very good plan." She paused. "He left when she was 11 days old." The simplicity of how she said it. No drama, no bitterness. Just the plain architecture of a difficult truth landed on Ethan with considerable weight. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it. "Don't be. I got Lily." She glanced at her daughter, who was now apparently teaching Benny to drink hot chocolate. "Everything else I thought I wanted, I would have traded 10 times over for her." "Mama," said Lily, without looking up, "Benny says the marshmallows are good." "Tell Benny I'm very pleased," Sophia said. Ethan watched this small, easy exchange, the unstudied love in Sophia's voice, the complete security in Lily's, and felt something stir in him that had nothing to do with strategy or planning, and everything to do with something he hadn't let himself feel in a very long time. He stayed in that kitchen for 2 hours. He helped Lily build a tower out of sugar packets that eventually reached 11 stories before collapsing magnificently. He learned that Sophia had been working at the Harrington Grand for 2 years, that she had a degree in early childhood education that she was slowly working toward completing online, that she spoke to her mother in Guadalajara every Sunday morning, and that she took Lily to Central Park every Saturday when her schedule allowed because Lily believed, with absolute conviction, that there was a specific duck there who recognized them. When he finally stood to leave, his PR team had sent 7 messages and his best man had called 4 times. He looked at Sophia across the small kitchen table and felt completely, inexplicably reluctant to walk back out into the world of $4 million weddings and Forbes lists and carefully curated plans. "Thank you," he said, "for the hot chocolate, for the company." "It was Lily," Sophia said, smiling. "She's the one who noticed you were sad." "She was right," he said. He glanced down at Lily, who was looking up at him with those enormous, frank eyes. "Thank you, Lily." Lily held up Benny solemnly. "Benny says you can come back." He looked at the worn rabbit. He looked at the small, serious child offering the most generous thing in her possession. He looked at her mother, who was watching him with an expression that was carefully neutral but not entirely successful at concealing something warmer beneath it. "Tell Benny," he said, "that I'd really like that." He came back. Not immediately. The weeks after the wedding were a storm that Ethan moved through with the same controlled efficiency he applied to every crisis, fielding headlines and managing narratives and having the long, honest, surprisingly peaceful conversation with Cassandra that they should have had 6 months earlier. She was kind. He was kind. They agreed, without rancor, that they had mistaken compatibility for love and ambition for connection, and that they were both better served by honesty than by an expensive mistake continued. The headlines called it a scandal. His board was watchful. His mother called twice a day for 2 weeks. His life, in its public dimensions, was loud and demanding and required constant management. But there was this other thing, this quiet thing, that he kept finding himself thinking about in the spaces between the noise. A small kitchen, a sleeping cat mug, a tower of sugar packets reaching 11 impossible stories. A woman who had told him a hard truth when he'd asked for one and hadn't apologized for it. He was the owner of the hotel. He had legitimate reasons to be present in the building. He told himself 3 times that he was going back for professional reasons. The 3rd time he told himself this, he was carrying a bag with a stuffed duck in it, the specific variety of duck from Central Park, which he had spent 45 minutes identifying based on Lily's description to a bemused toy store employee on 5th Avenue, and he acknowledged, quietly, that professional reasons had nothing to do with it. He found Sophia in the East Wing on a Tuesday afternoon in early December, changing linens in a room that looked out over the gray shimmer of the Hudson. She turned when she heard him and went completely still in the way people do when something unexpected walks through a door they didn't know was open. "Mister," she started. "Ethan," he said. She looked at the bag. "What is that?" "Apparently," he said, "there's a duck in Central Park who knows Lily. I thought he might need representation in Benny's absence." Sophia stared at him for a long moment, with an expression that moved through surprise and calculation and something softer and more uncertain that she tried to rein back in. Then she said, with careful precision, "She's going to lose her mind. Is that all right?" She looked at him. That direct, perceptive look that he was beginning to understand was her truest mode of engagement, the one she deployed when something actually mattered. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" "I'm not entirely sure," he admitted. "I know that I think about that kitchen more than I think about most things that happened in November. I know that I would like to take you and Lily to see the duck in Central Park that she believes recognizes her, if you'd be willing. And I know..." He paused, and for the first time in the conversation, something uncertain moved across his face. "I know that the last thing I want to do is make your life more complicated. If I'm overstepping, just tell me. I'm not good at overstepping quietly." Sophia was quiet for a moment. She set down the pillow she was holding. "She talks about you," she said. "At night, when I'm putting her to bed. She tells Benny about the man who is sad and sat on the floor. Something happened in his chest. She says you were kind," Sophia continued. "Lily has a very accurate radar for kindness. She can tell the real kind from the polite kind." "What did you tell her about me?" Sophia looked at the window, at the gray Hudson light, and then back at him. "I told her you were a good man who was having a hard day." "And was that the truth?" "I thought so," she said. "I still think so." The friendship that grew over the following weeks was not dramatic. It was the quiet, incremental kind, the kind built in ordinary moments rather than grand ones. Saturday mornings in Central Park, the 3 of them, watching Lily have extended and apparently meaningful conversations with a mallard named Gerald, whom she had formally introduced to Ethan with great ceremony on their first visit. Tuesday afternoons in the staff kitchen, when Sophia's shift ended at 4 and Ethan found himself coincidentally present. A Sunday phone call that became a habit, initially framed as updates on a mentorship program Ethan was quietly funding for the hotel's staff education initiatives, but which evolved with the natural inevitability of two people who genuinely liked each other's minds into something far longer and wider than any agenda. Lily blossomed in his company the way children do with adults who take them seriously. She presented him with a crayon drawing every time she saw him, a series that evolved from purple dogs to increasingly recognizable portraits. She taught him what she knew about ducks, which was considerable. She insisted on sitting between them at the park bench with the calm authority of someone managing diplomatic relations between two powers that required proximity. Sophia watched this and tried to be careful. She was a woman who had learned to be careful. She knew the arithmetic of their worlds, his polished and global, and attended by the kind of structural power that rewrote the rules of every room it entered, hers built from the daily, unglamorous, genuinely loving work of raising a daughter on her own while slowly, methodically building towards something better. She had seen how those two worlds could interact. She had seen what happened when the imbalance became visible. But Ethan was relentlessly, stubbornly equal with her. He asked her opinions and listened to them. He deferred to her on everything concerning Lily with a respect that was entirely real. He never made her feel like a charity project or a curiosity or a brief departure from his real life. He made her feel, with the quiet consistency of someone whose word actually meant something, like a person he genuinely chose to spend time with. It was terrifying. She didn't tell him this. But she didn't pretend it wasn't true, either. In mid-January, walking back from the park with Lily asleep on Ethan's shoulder, she had insisted he carry her, and he had agreed with an immediacy that had turned Sophia's heart over. Sophia said quietly into the cold evening air, "She's going to be sad when this changes." Ethan looked at her over Lily's sleeping head. "When it changes?" "Things like this change," Sophia said. "You'll go back to your actual life, and we were a November thing. We were what happened after the wedding." He stopped walking. She stopped too. "Sophia." His voice was very steady. "Look at me." She looked at him. He was standing on a New York sidewalk in the early evening dark with her sleeping 3-year-old daughter on his shoulder, and he was looking at her with an expression of such deliberate, clear-eyed honesty that it took her breath slightly. "I am in my actual life," he said. "This is it. Right here." She stood on that sidewalk and felt, in the January cold, something warm move through her that she had been carefully keeping behind a door for 2 months, and the door swung open despite everything she had done to keep it latched. She didn't say anything, but she reached out and adjusted Lily's small coat, and her hand brushed his shoulder, and neither of them moved for a long moment. Lily stirred, without waking, and tightened her small fingers in the fabric of Ethan's collar. He covered her small hand with his, gently, so she wouldn't let go. It was February. Lily had a fever. Not a dangerous one. Not the kind that required emergency rooms. The ordinary kind that small children run with the casual indifference of their immune systems doing vigorous work, 102 degrees and fussy, and wanting her mother, and accepting no substitutes. Sophia had called out of her evening shift, settled Lily on the couch with a cool cloth and Benny and a rotation of gentle films, and was sitting on the floor beside her with one hand resting on her daughter's small back, monitoring the rhythm of her breathing with the particular, unwavering vigilance of a parent watching over a sick child. Ethan called at 7. She answered because she answered his calls. That was simply what had become true, and told him quickly where things stood. She told herself she expected, a warm expression of concern followed by an offer to check in tomorrow. He arrived at her apartment door at 7:45 with a bag that contained children's acetaminophen, 3 different kinds of electrolyte popsicles, a new episode of Lily's favorite animated series downloaded offline in case the internet cut out, and, inexplicably, a small stuffed elephant. "Lily told me last week," he said at the door, "that Gerald the duck is getting lonely." I thought he might need a friend. Sophia looked at him. She looked at the bag. She felt something she had been managing very carefully for 3 months come completely undone. You can't keep doing this, she said, and her voice was not quite steady. He looked at her carefully. Doing what? Being exactly this. She gestured. At him, at the bag, at the door, at the general impossible fact of his presence. You can't keep being exactly this and expect me to, she stopped. Expect you to what? He said quietly. She looked away. She loves you, she said, which was easier than the other sentence. Lily loves you. You know that. I know, he said. I love her too. A pause, and then, with the same directness he had shown her from the beginning, the plain truth quality that she had never been able to dismantle a defense against. And I love her mother. The hallway was very quiet. Ethan. I'm not asking you for anything tonight, he said quickly. You have a sick kid. It's not. This isn't the moment I planned. I don't have a plan for this, which is entirely new territory for me. You said things change. I need you to know that this doesn't change for me. Whatever you decide. However long you need. This doesn't change. She stood in the doorway of her apartment, which was small and warm and full of crayon drawings and picture books, and the quiet sound of her daughter's cartoon playing from the living room, and she looked at Ethan Harrington, who had started as a headline and become a stranger in a corridor and become a friend and had, without her entirely authorizing it, become something that felt entirely necessary. And she felt the last careful distance she had been maintaining simply dissolve. Come in, she said. She'll want to see the elephant. Lily, from the couch, heard his voice when he said hello and sat up with the electric alacrity of a sick child whose favorite person has unexpectedly appeared, fever and fatigue momentarily irrelevant.
Ethan.
Mama, Ethan's here. I see that, baby. Did you bring Gerald's friend? Because she had been consulted on the elephant plan, in the way that Ethan consulted her on all important matters. Right here. He crouched beside the couch and produced the elephant, who was gray and soft and apparently named Josephine, according to the tag. Josephine. She's been waiting to meet Gerald. Lily took Josephine with both hands, held her up to examine her at length, and then, with the solemn authority of someone making a formal decision, tucked her under the blanket alongside Benny. She can stay, Lily said. This was the highest honor. She was asleep by 8:30, Benny on one side and Josephine on the other, her fever breaking gently into the ordinary warm sleep of a child who had everything she needed. Ethan and Sophia sat on the couch in the quiet that followed, the extraordinary, particular quiet of a small apartment after a child has fallen asleep, full of the soft sounds of breathing and the distant city and the sense of a world contracted to just this room and the people in it. She called you her person, Sophia said softly. 2 weeks ago. I asked her who her person was and she said, Mama and Benny and Ethan. In that order. He was quiet for a moment. And you, he said. Who's your person? She looked at him. In the lamplight, in the ordinary living room with its crayon drawings and its picture books and its small sleeping daughter, she looked at him clearly and honestly and without the careful management she had been practicing for months. I'm working on being brave enough to answer that, she said. He reached over, very slowly, and took her hand. Take your time, he said. I'm not going anywhere. She looked down at their joined hands. She looked at her daughter sleeping peacefully between a rabbit and an elephant. She thought about plans that break and things that grow in the spaces where the plans used to be. She turned her hand over and held his. You, she said quietly. You're my person. Spring came to Manhattan on a Saturday, the specific Saturday in late April when the city remembers that winter was not the whole story, A morning of yellow light and warming sidewalks and Central Park greening so fast you could almost watch it happen. Gerald the duck was back in his usual territory by the pond, and Lily had greeted him with the emotional intensity of a reunion after a long separation, conveying several months of news in what appeared to be fluent duck-adjacent communication. Ethan stood with Sophia on the path watching this, her hand in his, a simple, public, warm fact that had been true for 10 weeks now, and which felt, each time, like the most natural thing that had ever happened to him. They had been careful. Not secret. People at the hotel knew. His family knew. His mother had cried on the phone with a specific gratitude that suggested she had found Cassandra beautiful but not warm. Sophia's mother in Guadalajara knew and had opinions, but careful, slow, built on the real thing rather than the speed of feeling. Sophia had set the pace, and he had matched it without complaint, because the pace she set was the honest one, the one that built something that would hold. What he hadn't expected, what continued to undo him, regularly and without warning, was Lily. He had loved her, he thought, from approximately the moment she held out a worn rabbit to a stranger on the floor of a service corridor and said, "Benny helps," with the absolute certainty of someone who had never doubted that comfort was worth offering. But what had grown over 6 months was something larger and deeper and more specific than he had known to expect, a love with its own vocabulary, its own rituals, its own particular weight. He knew her specific yellows. He knew the exact way she liked her hot chocolate and the name of every duck in Gerald's extended social circle and the crayon color she considered non-negotiable for skies, not regular blue, the blue with a bit of green. He knew she was afraid of the sound of the smoke alarm and bold with strangers and deeply, naturally kind in the way that some children simply are, a kindness that wasn't learned but inhabited. He knew that she climbed into his lap without asking, the way she did with Sophia, with the uncalculated trust of someone who had decided, fully and permanently, that he was safe. He knew he wanted to be her father. He had known this for a while. He had been waiting for the right moment with the patience that genuinely important things deserved. He hadn't planned what actually happened. They were eating sandwiches on a park bench when Lily put down her sandwich and looked at him with a specific quality of attention that meant she had been thinking about something for some time and had now decided to address it. "Ethan," she said. "Lily," he said. "Do you love my mama?" Sophia made a small sound beside him. He glanced at her. She had gone very still, her sandwich halfway to her mouth, watching him with wide eyes, and then looked back at Lily, who was waiting with the patient confidence of someone who already knew the answer, but required it stated formally. "Yes," he said. "Very much." Lily nodded. She had known this. "Do you love me?" "More than I know how to say." She considered this. Gerald, nearby, paddled with total indifference to these human proceedings. "Then you should stay," Lily said, with the simplicity of someone resolving a problem whose solution had always been obvious. "You should just stay with us. Forever." The word forever landed on the bench between the three of them like something that had been waiting a long time to be spoken. Ethan looked at Sophia. Sophia looked at him, and her eyes were bright, and she wasn't entirely successful at managing her expression, and she was more beautiful in this moment, in the yellow April light with her sandwich forgotten in her hand and her daughter sitting between them having just announced the terms of their future, than he had ever seen her. He reached into his jacket pocket. He had been carrying it for 3 weeks. A ring, not the architectural diamond statement that had been on Cassandra's finger, but something quieter and exactly right. A warm yellow gold band with a single pear-shaped stone that was, unmistakably, the specific shade that Lily had designated the correct yellow. He had found it accidentally, in an estate jewelry shop on a Tuesday, and had stood there for 10 minutes knowing with complete certainty before he bought it. He held it out, not just to Sophia. He looked at Lily first. "Lily," he said. I would very much like to stay with you and your mama. Forever. If that's all right with you. Both of you. Lily looked at the ring.
She looked at Ethan.
She looked at her mother. Then she turned back to Ethan with an expression of radiant, 3-year-old solemnity and said, "You have to ask Benny." He produced Benny, who had been in his jacket pocket for exactly this reason, because he had consulted Lily 2 days ago about the correct protocol for important decisions, and she had told him clearly that Benny was the official advisor, and held the rabbit up at eye level. "Benny," he said, with complete and genuine seriousness, "may I marry Sophia and stay with you both forever?" Lily took Benny. She made Benny look at the ring. She made Benny look at Ethan. She appeared to conduct an internal consultation of great depth. "Benny says yes," she announced. "But you have to do the marshmallows last." "Done," he said instantly. Sophia's laugh broke through tears, both at once. The laugh and the tears, the helpless combination of the two that belongs to moments of joy so large they overflow the ordinary categories of response. She looked at the ring, and then at him, and then at her daughter, who was now introducing Benny to the concept of his new role as ring-bearer with focused intensity.
"Ethan," she said.
"Sophia." He was still holding the ring. His hand, he noticed, was not entirely steady. This man who had stood at 100 high-stakes tables without flinching was not entirely steady. "I came into your life through a service corridor on the worst afternoon of the year, and you gave me hot chocolate and an honest opinion, and you let me sit on your kitchen floor and build towers out of sugar packets. And somewhere in all of that completely unplanned, completely unstrategized sequence of events, I found the only life I actually want to live. I love you. I love Lily. I would like, if you'll have me, to spend the rest of my time on Earth being your person." Sophia reached out and took the ring from his hand. She looked at it, at that specific, correct yellow, that quiet gold, that small perfect stone, and she put it on her own finger because her hands were steadier than his right now, and she held it up and looked at it in the April light. "Yes," she said. "Yes." Lily, who had been monitoring proceedings over Benny's head, let out a sound of pure, uncomplicated joy that sent Gerald paddling away in mild alarm and made 2 strangers on a nearby bench look over and smile with the involuntary sympathy of witnesses to something genuinely good. Then she launched herself across the bench at both of them simultaneously, small arms going around as much of them as she could reach. Benny crushed between them all. "Benny," she announced, into the general warm crush of the 3 of them, "says this is correct." Ethan put one arm around Sophia and one around Lily and held them both, there on a park bench in the yellow April morning, and felt, for a man who had spent his career building structures designed to last, like he had finally, for the first time, built something that actually would. A service corridor. A worn rabbit. A cup of hot chocolate with the marshmallows last. 3-year-old Lily Reyes had held out the most precious thing she owned to a sad stranger on the worst day of his year, and had thereby, with the absolute unerring accuracy of a child who could tell the real kind from the polite kind, started the chain of small, honest, unhurried moments that had led, inevitably, here. To this bench. This morning. This family. Forever. Sometimes the grandest love stories begin not in ballrooms, but in service corridors. Not with roses and champagne, but with a worn rabbit named Benny and a cup of cocoa with marshmallows on top. Because the truest things rarely announce themselves. They just sit beside you on the floor and ask if you're sad and offer you the best thing they have, and that, it turns out, is more than enough to change everything.